Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in Europe or on the globe. We are delighted to welcome you to our session on effective home renovation programs to stimulate post-COVID-19 economic recovery. My name is Adrian Joyce. I'm the campaign director of the Renovate Europe campaign, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. Could I ask the EUSEW team to launch the PowerPoints for our session? Thank you. We're facing a very difficult time in Europe and in the world. We're going to see a large economic downturn coming at us very, very soon. And we are already planning for how to manage that. And the speakers and myself are convinced that building renovation can play a very major part in aiding our economies and our people to recover from the COVID-19 shock. And as we've all learned during this period of confinement, our homes are possibly the most important building that we occupy. And therefore, our main consideration today and occupation is to understand how to upscale the deep energy renovation of homes in an effective manner. Could I move to the next slide? In fact, 2 slides forward. To set the scene, I'm going to give you a keynote presentation as campaign director in order to present to you our view of the macroeconomic benefits that building renovation will bring to society. And following my keynote speech, we're going to hear from a panel of 5 speakers who each have specific valuable experience of how to boost home renovations in. And I remind the audience that you have the Slido tool on your screens. If you are in full screen mode, you just press escape, and on the right-hand side below the video, you will see the Slido application. Please start asking questions right away. That way we can work with those questions during the exchanges on your in the audience interaction. So what I wanted to quickly present to you, and I think I'm going to take just five or 6 minutes, is a study that we recently launched as Renovate Europe. Next slide, please. It was prepared for us by the Building Performance Institute Europe and consisted of a desk research on recent studies estimating the job creation potential and economic stimulus potential of energy renovation. We asked for this because the last good information dates from 2014, when the International Energy Agency undertook such a study. And we're happy that BPIE found 35 more recent studies to review. And in that review, we've come up with some very, very interesting answers to what are the macroeconomic benefits of building renovation. The headline result of our work with the BPIE is that on average, 18 jobs are created in the European Union for every 1 million invested in building renovation. Now, naturally, given that member states have different starting points, the number of jobs varies depending on different factors like cost of employment, cultural issues, etc. And we see a range here in the slide, running from a low of 15 jobs per million in Italy to a high of 29 jobs in Croatia. As I say, the average number of jobs comes down to 18 per million invested. Next slide, please. When we link this to the recently published Next Generation EU instrument, where the European Commission has identified an investment gap of 185 billion euro per year for renovation activity, that's going across all segments of the building sector, not just homes. And then applying the 18 jobs per million number, we would find that if we can mobilize this much financing, we would create 3.3 million jobs in the EU. Now, in the current circumstances, that's extremely good news. And we believe that our sector offers, it's maybe an exaggeration to say it, but offers a lifeline to many other sectors where more permanent job losses from the COVID crisis appear to be crystallizing. And there are many very good reskilling and upskilling programs already used in member states that can be used to absorb some of that unemployment from other sectors into our sector. And linked to that is the fact that our sector is becoming more digitalized, more industrialized, and therefore the quality and type of jobs is much more attractive to a younger generation and indeed to women. Now, within the report, we found that there are other ways of thinking about the boost to public finances. Take Spain, for example. In the BPIE work, they found studies that show that to create a job in construction in Spain costs about €14,000, whereas to support a single unemployed person in the construction sector is €20,000. So for each job that Spain would create, they save €6,000 right away for their public finances. Interestingly, also in Spain, it was found that for each euro invested of public money, leveraging private money, of course, you get an immediate return within a year of 62 cents to public finances. These kinds of numbers, we hope, are going to be very convincing to give courage to policymakers and politicians to really boost renovation in the near future. Next slide, please. So beyond that, we looked at some segments of the building stock because indeed the European Commission has asked about, has put forward the idea that addressing the building stock by segment is a valuable way forward. Now, if you want to take high quality office renovation, you can boost productivity of those working in the office by about 12%. And that, when monetized, could be worth up to 500 billion annually to the EU economy. In hospitals, which have been in the front line lately, we find that high quality renovated hospitals reduce on average the stay by 11%. This could be worth up to 45 billion per year to the health sector, releasing more money for studies, research, for example, into the vaccines that we so badly need. And then in dwellings, we didn't find an EU-wide study, but there is a very good study from France that shows that poor quality homes are costing 930 million euro per year to the health sector through illness, through doctors' visits, to hospital stays, etc. And if you add the indirect costs to the economy from absenteeism and loss of productivity, this could be as much as 20 billion euro for the French economy. So I think our message from the Renovate Europe campaign is that the politicians and the decision makers should be courageous and should work with us in order to make the renovation wave a great success. Next slide, please. If you want to follow up on my presentation or indeed study, you can my email address. Okay, it's not coming up. At this point, and before we go to the panel of speakers, we would like to go through a word cloud Slido. So if that could be put up, we'd be very happy to hear whom are we addressing. So could you just, in one word, put in which country you're currently joining this session from? And that would give us a picture of who we're addressing. And that for us would be very, very helpful indeed. And I have no idea how many of you are on board, but we had over 700 registrations, if I remember correctly. So On my screen, I see that Belgium is taking the lead, with Spain and Italy coming close second and third. So, but I see we have Scotland, Ibiza, different parts of the world. Interesting, I don't yet see a non-EU participant, which, you know, would be great when it's an online event that we reach an even broader audience. But I see we're covering the four corners of Europe. So already that's a very, very helpful indication for us. So thank you very much. I see over 75 replies. That's fantastic. And indeed, great coverage across the European Union and the European continent, but not seeing, we have at least one Canadian. That's fantastic. So more than welcome to be with us, and you're up quite early over there. So could we move on, because we're going to have a poll now. We're going to ask you a question, poll number 1. And this is a question which asks, in your opinion, which aspects of home renovation one-stop shops services should be free of charge for citizens? So a one-stop shop is a place where you can go to get guidance, to arrange your financing, to coordinate your renovation works, etc. Which of these services should be provided free of charge for citizens? And our idea, of course, is that that gives us an indication of which are the most valuable of the services, at least in the opinion of our audience today. So I'm going to wait and let the poll run till we get to around the 70 number again. And what I'm seeing is quite an even split between facilitating access to finance, introductory project setup guidance, and energy audits. But indeed, members of the audience believe that, at least some of you believe that all of these services should be provided free. Now, we didn't want to put all of the above in our poll, but again, the project guidance and finance are turning out to be the key. Finances keeps jumping back up to the top, as you can see. So heartening for us, because indeed we are talking largely today about financing and about one-stop shop services. Okay, we've reached over 70 answers, which is a very good answer. And I see so I think we can end the poll and move on to our panel debate. So as I said, we are very, very pleased to have with us 5 speakers, all of whom have great experience of home renovations and how to motivate it. And our first speaker is going to be Davide Canorossi from GNE Finance. And Davide, I'd like to ask you to speak to the following question. What solutions to getting home renovations off the ground have you experience of? And could you describe that experience to us? Davide, over to you.
Adrian, thank you very much for the introduction and for the keynote. Very interesting to see also the results of these first poll. Which are a very important source of information for us that we're dealing with one-stop shops and programs on the ground. So good morning to everybody, and thank you for the Commission for organizing the event. When it comes to, and I will address your question, Adrian, about what solutions we are getting for the implementation of the renovation way. What we see is that in this post-COVID situation, as you mentioned, it is fundamental to create instruments and solutions that are able to merge and to coordinate the economic recovery with the energy transition from a socioeconomic perspective and for their environmental impact. So as you see, some of the data that we are reporting here about job creations are the same that you reported from the BPIE study. So I'm not going to repeat in that. We also put lots of focus on energy poverty, because we are aware that in Europe is a growing reality, and of course the existing and coming recession is just going to increase these elements of social and energy poverty. Just a data from the ground that I learned yesterday for you to have a pulse of the situation. The city of Madrid pre-COVID was feeding an average of 7,000 people per day, of course, as a free of charge service provided by the city. Now, as of today, the city of Madrid is feeding over 90,000 people per day. So we're talking about 12 times what happened before, and they are ready to gear up to 0.3 million in case the recession gets worse. So these data from cities, from the ground, tells us how serious is the situation, how deep can be, and so how effective have to be our instruments in order to be able to address this recession and to provide means for recovery and growth, and most importantly, being able to harness these recovery and growth with the development of a new society. And in that regard, we believe that the Europe-based mechanism that I'm going to describe is part of the solution. It's a mechanism that integrates different elements and that we believe that can be a very effective solution for the renovation wave. And one word more about this is that we are completely mindful of the fact that here there's no silver bullet. So we don't expect one solution to be the panacea for any country and for any need in the renovation way. But when it comes to these huge efforts that collectively we have to do, we need really to be able to bring different solutions that can complement each other. Next slide, please. So the Europace is composed of three elements that we saw as extremely effective, which are technical assistance, the affordable financing. As we saw, both elements have been the first and the second element that people ask the most from one-stop shops. And the third one is smart funding. Smart funding from public administrations. In other words, is finding ways for channel public funding in programs like Europace so that they can provide financing and support also to people in vulnerable situations and in energy poverty. We tested this solution in Spain in two programs. One of them is the Hola Domus that is currently running in Catalonia. Next slide, please. These three elements generate what we call the trust to renovate from people. So the empowerment people that can be aware that they can undergo their own renovation process. We implement these through three steps, which are the program design, the setup, and the management of the program itself, which is basically putting together a one-stop shop and bringing the financing that is needed for all the people to implement the project. And we provide a set of tools from market analysis to sales, digitalizing, for tracking, so that the deliverable of these services can be really effective. Next slide, please. So I'll be delighted to listen to your questions and to provide more information about how Europace and how Genie Finance can help cities and regions and governments to deploy these type of solutions. Here we really want to stress that all the public agents needs to take the lead on this topic, and that we are here to support them and to provide effective and consolidated solutions that can be scalable and that can provide the renovation way for all the citizens. Thank you very much.
Davide, thank you very much for that clear presentation and for good timekeeping. I'm particularly impressed by the model that allows to build trust among people, a very key issue in our sector. And indeed, I know there'll be questions for you when we get back to the debate shortly. So now I'm going to introduce and give the floor to Josera Lopez from the Basque region of Spain. Josera is going to speak to us about effective home renovation programs. But Josera, I hope you'll be able to also address which solutions you have experience of and which ones are working for your region in Spain. Josera, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for your kind presentation. Thanks also to the organizers of this European Sustainable Energy Week and to all the participants. We are far, but closer than ever. In the case of our project, it's a project that is starting, and I would love to have solutions on top of the table. But what we have now is a lot of illusion. We are working really hard to try to establish a program. I will introduce the one-stop shop concept that we are developing in our project, Heroes for All OPENGELA. Next slide, please. The project has the ambition to contribute to the renovation of all the housing stock in the Basque Country until 2050. This will be approximately 1 million homes. One first thing to take into account is that the housing stock of the Basque Country is the oldest in the EU. 43% of the buildings were built before 1961. Another point to take into account of our housing stock is its distribution in multi-property buildings and the high levels of ownership. This makes more difficult the decision-making process for building renovation. At this stage, we have been working for more than 1 year, have established 2 pilot district offices, and right now we are defining the management entity for the program in the Basque Country. In this early stage, we have put the focus in vulnerable districts, as due to recent studies carried out by the Basque government, more than 30% of the population live in vulnerable conditions. In the last 40 years, there have been subsidies programs from the government to try to solve the situations. But after that, we are in similar conditions. And there are still 30 districts that require immediate action in our region. With all these ingredients, we are designing a program that includes a coordinated network of district offices with the involvement of all the levels of the administration. We have the objective of renovating the Basque housing stock, all the Basque housing stock in the long term, with a focus on energy efficiency and with a focus on vulnerable districts. Next slide, please. In our region, energy consumption in the residential sector stands for 18% of the total energy demand. Also, our mild climate makes energy retrofitting payback much longer than in Northern Europe countries. This way, energy saving is not the only trigger for the renovation. The main aspects to take into account should be comfort, health, and other non-tangible issues. That's why our program includes other levers to home renovation, as accessibility, safety, and district regeneration. In our program, the involvement of different levels of the public administration is clear, starting from the leadership of the Basque government, the involvement of the Basque Energy Agency, and the active participation of municipalities. We believe that the renovation should focus in districts. This will bring a multiplying effect, economies of scale, and the creation of local economies at district level. That's why our program includes the establishment of physical district offices as a tool to articulate the aspects related to home renovation. As said before, we put special attention to the social issues, as we are focusing in vulnerable districts that, by the way, are the ones that might suffer the post-COVID-19 crisis with a higher intensity. Next slide, please. As for the district offices in our project, this includes 2 pilots established in Ocharcoaga district in Bilbao and Chonta district in Eibar. By the way, both cities have a team in La Liga, so for football fans, they will be happy to visit the district, the 2 pilots. We are designing a management structure to coordinate all the district offices that will participate in the program. The structure and competences of this body is under discussion right now, but we expect that this will be articulated from a public-private collaboration with the participation of different levels of the administration. The district offices will provide a holistic service to the citizens, guiding and accompanying them through the renovation journey, not only at a building level, but also at district level. This includes, among other, technical assistance, one-stop shop, top lines for subsidies and financing, and follow-up. The offices are designed and planned to be a physical point. We believe that this might attract the interest of people, and the closeness will generate trust. The office might also be a social meeting point for the district. In any case, we need now to test how this office might work due to the new reality originated by the COVID-19. Our priorities in energy renovation include strength and passive measures in order to reduce the demand and prioritize renewable energy generation. This is really ambitious for the south of Europe, but we trust in the levers provided by accessibility, safety, urban regeneration, and the social aspects we cover with this program. And this is all I wanted to share with you right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josera. A very interesting story and a very innovative approach to this question of home renovation. I have several questions that I'm going to hopefully be able to ask you during our panel discussion shortly. But I'm going to move right along. And if we could move forward on the slides, please. I'm delighted to introduce Cecilia Hugoni from Renovate Italy, the national partner, in fact, of the Renovate Europe campaign. And Cecilia is going to talk to us about the very innovative tax credit scheme in Italy. But you might pepper that with your own experiences of how home renovation can be stimulated in the Italian market. Over to you, Cecilia, about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for the kind invitation. So I will try in this very short time to explain how does this scheme works. My point of view is, well, I am an entrepreneur in the construction sector, and my company is specialized in using this kind of incentive and helping householders to in their renovation journey, deep renovation journey, I would say. So next slide, please. This scheme, we can say that completely deletes the financial and economical barrier to renovation. The scheme gives a strong economic public support to home deep renovation, and this support is not accounted as public debt according to the Eurostat accounting rules. The scheme is very easy to use and calls private investment to support, to give a financial support both to contractor and to householder for using this scheme. This financial support is normally given by big oil and gas companies who integrate their investment in energy deep renovation in their own strategies towards energy transition. So with one measure, we can say that we reach different and very important targets. Next slide, please. In Italy, we have a very long experience with tax credit scheme to support renovation. It was introduced firstly in 1986 to fight against underground economy. Since then, every year, the scheme was confirmed and improved with until now that we have almost 16 different tax credit according to the kind of renovation that we are undertaking and the technology that we are using. So the refund through this tax credit is from 50% for a normal business as usual renovation up to 85% for seismic renovation. Now the Italian Parliament is working on the post-COVID recovery plan and is working on a big incentive up to 110% of total cost for very ambitious deep renovation. It's important to underline that we have different studies that supports that revenues, that there is a good balance between revenues and expenditure for the government, for the state. And this is why the scheme is confirmed and improved. Next slide, please. The big innovation, we had it, it's ready in the market since half of 2018. And this is the opportunity to use this tax credit directly to pay the contractor through the handover of tax credit mechanism. So this means that householders that undertake some renovation works signs a contract with the company who accepts to be paid through the through the tax credit. So you can see the orange arrow represents the paid in money, and the blue one what is paid through tax credit. In year 2, the contractor has the tax credit in his own fiscal box, and so it has two choices. It can use this tax credit to cover his tax expenses in the next 10 years, or on the other side, can decide to hand over it a second time to a big tax payer, let's say another taxpayer, who gives it directly in year 2 the liquidity that the contractor needs to pay manpower and materials. So, of course, the second option is the one that is used more often. The company who is buying the tax credit last time used to be oil and gas companies. The law that is now in the Italian Parliament allows also the handover of tax credit to banks and other financial institution. This is a really big innovation, and we are not ready to say how it will be usable in the market and how it will work. As the mechanism is working since half of 2018, and this kind of deep renovation works normally since the beginning of the project to the end of the works, it takes 2 years and a half for home renovation. Data are not yet so clear of the impact that the mechanism has into the market. But of course, we are sure that it will unlock a big potential of home renovation in Italy. Thank you.
Cecilia, thank you very much for that. I know there's great interest in this scheme, so I will come back to you with some questions for clarification, as you expect, afterwards. So now moving on, I'm delighted to welcome from the Building Performance Institute Europe, Ivan Jankovic, and he's a senior project manager. Ivan, can you take us through what your experience is of upscaling home renovations and what your knowledge is on bill schemes? Ivan, about 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Adrian, and hello to everyone. We believe that energy transition and post-COVID recovery can be significantly supported by on-bill schemes, and I will now try to explain, first of all, what this is and why these schemes can help. So we can go to the next slide, please. So in short, and later we will focus on how they work. But in short, on-bill schemes are financing mechanisms where energy utilities play a big role and are positioned between financiers and end users, and where energy bills are used as repayment vehicles. Such a structure, where actually energy utility is a facilitator, may easily eliminate different barriers, financial barriers, but also other types of barriers, and significantly increase renovation rates, and in that sense, boost economy and also support the COVID recovery. We can go to the next slide, please. So in the next couple of bullet points, I will try to explain how could we support the post-COVID recovery with using on-bill schemes, and what is that, what makes these schemes important and efficient. Two aspects, there are different ways how on-bill schemes could help, but there are two aspects that are very important. I would say it is increasing volume of investments and improving expected returns for different participants. So if we go briefly through different features of on-bill schemes, first of all, utilities are serving a large number of customers, and that is why they could be used as a very efficient channel for approaching end users and increasing investment volumes. Second, as we know, energy efficiency investments should not be perceived as isolated products, and utilities could easily merge energy efficiency with other services they provide and make it then more appealing for end users. Also, if we talk about energy assessment, utilities could easily perform accurate, but what is also important, standardized energy evaluation of projects. And this is especially true given the available large database of past energy performance and billed energy consumption that is available to utilities. Also, energy efficiency, as we know, is a small-scale investment from the perspective of financiers, and they therefore have high transaction costs when thinking about these investments. How utilities can help? They could, after approaching and checking on potential clients, they could simply group different end users into portfolios and supply financiers with prospective portfolios of investments. We can go to the next slide, please. In addition to billed energy consumption history, utilities can provide significant bill payment history, which can be used as an additional and very accurate risk assessment tool specific for this type of projects. Also, if we think about, when we think about bringing utilities in the financing structure, what we are doing, we are actually bringing energy supply and connection with the supply grid in financing structure, and this can be used as a very efficient securitization tool by financiers who could simply use possible supply grid disconnection as a collateral and therefore reduce their perceived risk. Finally, I would say finally in this list, but not in the total list of benefits, definitely keeping in mind their technical but also financial skills, utilities could provide very efficient advisory service and be an efficient one-stop shop and a source of information for end users. To conclude, I would just mention that on-bill schemes have been successfully implemented in the United States for the last 30 years. And through an ongoing Renovation project BPIE is involved in, we are trying to understand how to make on-bill schemes possible on a large scale also in Europe. So this is an ongoing project, and please stay tuned for more results. That would be all from my side. Thank you.
And thank you, Ivan, for that expose on your views on on-bill payments. Indeed, we'll come back and dig into a couple of those topics shortly. But you also had a very nice link to our last presenter, whom I'll introduce in just a moment, because I would like to remind the audience that you can ask questions for the panel discussion that we'll have, which is going to be in two sections, using the Slido application, which you will find in the right-hand side of your screen in the participants side of this conference. So, as I said, I'm delighted to introduce our last speaker. It's Françoise Refaber from Énergie Demain. And we're going to hear from Françoise about how to boost the rollout of one-stop shops across the EU. Building on your own experience, if you can, Françoise, that you've built up over the years. So as for the other speakers, about 5 minutes, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Yes, I'm co-heading Énergie Demain, which is based in Paris, and we namely help local authorities in planning and implementing financing strategies in favor of energy-efficient building retrofits. And I have the opportunity to present the experience of third-party financing companies in France, as well as the partners of a European project, Innovate, which is ending this year. So all these initiatives are considered to be one-stop shops with reference to the energy performance of buildings directive, the EPBD, where they are mentioned but not really defined. Next slide, please. These public initiatives, they have been designed to respond to the need to support households in their renovation project without increasing subsidies, if possible, and to build on trust and encourage the retrofits thanks to the local authorities' involvement. So there is a consensus to consider that the one-stop shops should make available to consumers at a single point of contact all the information, the advice, but to make it simple, it requires a lot of things to do, as mentioned by the previous speakers and shown on this slide. And what we see is that since households' willingness to pay for advice in advance of the retrofit itself, since this willingness is quite low, and because the implementation of all this one-stop shop service involves many skills and requires significant resources, most of these one-stop shop projects need the support of the public sector. And as what is consistent with the poll you participated to, we see that the majority of local authorities focus on the role of raising awareness and to coordinate activities, which is consistent with the European definition of the social services of general interest, which can be provided for free. But we have much fewer examples of one-stop shops which are all-inclusive and include, for instance, the provision of financing. It can be found namely in France with the third-party financing companies, but the perception that the compliance with organizational rules of a service of general economic interest is much more complex than the free part of the service, is an important obstacle to this all-inclusive type of one-stop shops. Next slide, please. The effectiveness of these one-stop shops depends on their incorporation into a chain, which includes all the other different instruments which are provided for in the EPBD. For instance, one-stop shops, they should be instrumental in implementing energy efficiency standards and the mandatory energy improvements. They should leverage on local connections with installers, and they should play several key roles in ensuring a high quality chain for renovations. Next slide. Yes, we see that as regards energy performance certificates, they should also be improved to be more reliable, and ultimately they should be upgraded to be building renovation passports. So if one-stop shops introduce homeowners to the usage of this kind of device, the building renovation passport, then it can be very useful both to the one-stop shop, to the end user, the homeowner, but also to the local and national authorities as a source of updated data and monitoring tool for their own public policies. So coordinating the development of one-stop shop and passport and all over public instruments provided in the EPBD is really key. Next slide, please. So we see that since the economic model of one-stop shops is not yet stabilized, and there is a need to clarify the conditions for the public sector intervention. It's important that one-stop shop are considered as in charge of the coordination of all the public policies provided in the EPBD. So it means that part of their activity should be considered as serving public service obligations. And then if this is provided, then it allows to have direct public money injected in these actions. And it gives confidence to be consistent with state aid regulations and public procurement laws. So next slide, please. Yes, sorry, I missed my, it was the previous one, sorry, I didn't see you had already, thank you. And as facilitator of the renovation financing, we should refer to the taxonomy directive and find that a one-stop shop could be typical enabling activities according to this taxonomy directive. You will see that if the guidelines of taxonomy applied to energy renovations are aligned to on the national thermal regulations, which is not adequate with regards to the residential sector. And as a matter of fact, it's important to consider that one-stop shops should take responsibility to specify the renovation measures which are adapted to each and single cases, because it's a matter of taking advantage of energy gain potential when they are greater and compensate for the most difficult cases. So lastly, I really think that, as mentioned by the previous speakers, one-stop shops can help broaden the supply of financing. They help optimize the management of the various risks which are related to energy renovations and which are borne by the homeowners. which enhances the risk which are borne by the lenders. And they also should be considered as key instruments to access to public guarantees that could be set up or extended to cope with the objective of making energy refurbishments affordable to all homeowners. I thank you for your attention.
Françoise, thank you very much for that interesting presentation. I find it very convincing that one-stop shops can be considered as enabling activities under the taxonomy regulation, and also interesting to consider them as services of general economic interest. And I think they might be levers that we can rely on moving forward. So for the audience, we're now going to have a moderated conversation between the panelists. But in about 15 minutes, we're going to turn to the Slido and begin to look at your comments and questions. And indeed, please feel free to make comments and not just ask questions, so that we can, as panelists, also learn from your experience. That I think would be very helpful from our perspective. But thinking about the presentations we've just heard, we can see that there are two key themes: one-stop shops on the one hand, and then on-bill financing on the other hand. And I wonder, a number of participants are probably saying, well, what's the link between these two? So Davide, maybe you might say, can you talk about whether there's a link between this form of financing and one-stop shop service? How do they link together? But also from your presentation, I was very interested in how you believe the on-bill financing of Europace can be upscaled in Europe. We know you've got some successful pilots, but do you have high hopes that this can be one of the prime movers for home renovation as we move forward? So Davide, maybe you might start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adrian, for the question, which is very good and central to the implementation and the success of these programs. As we saw from the poll that we did at the beginning of the session, really the capacity to advise people and to provide them financings are the key enablers of home renovation at scale. Therefore, these two elements have to be part of the equation when we implement home renovation programs. Then when it comes to the way that we can provide that, there are a variety of solutions, and financing can, of course, come from standard lenders like banks. It can come from alternatives financing parties, like is in the case of the programs that Françoise was mentioning, which have been structured through third-party financiers, or financing can come through utilities, as Ivan was explaining. From our perspective and our experience, the most important things, and again, in the perspective that there's no silver bullet, therefore we need to go for a range of solutions, because it's impossible to increase this market by 2 or 3 times, which is what we have to do during the next decade in order to be in line with our target. It's impossible to do it if we are not able to provide the people in different cities, regions, and of different social background with complementary solutions. So, but one thing is central to your question, and it is that the technical assistance and the advisory of a one-stop shop has to find the right ways to communicate with the financing providers. And this is a work in progress. I would say that 5 years ago, this was an unknown subject, apart from some programs that were really front runners, like the ones that Françoise developed in France with a Picardy pass. But in the last few years, there's been quite a lot of development. What is key is that we can provide instruments and ways for making the financing safer, what is technically called the credit enhancement. So it does need to understand what is the collateral? So how these projects are structured, what are the risks, who are the counterparties, what happens, most important, what happens in case of defaults? So how defaults are treated, and what are the tools and means that can be used in order to recover the money? These are all central questions for financiers in order to understand which type of risk it is attached to this financing, if there's any collateral that they can record. Once there's a deep understanding of this, and we can start to support this with data, then we can generate that effect that is de-risking of these portfolios, and therefore that we can provide long-term financing at affordable conditions for most of citizens. And that's what we have been working on in the Europace application in Catalonia, which is the Oladomos. And on the other side, where we have been supporting the Basque government and the Basque Energy Agency in the OPENGELA project. It's really the deep understanding of the risk associated to the financing, to the project, and being able to provide answers that can de-risk the portfolio. And last word, I found that solutions cannot be just found in the finance spectrum. Also, regulation is fundamental, and the fiscal lever is also fundamental. So these three elements need hand in hand, and that's why, on that respect, the eco-bonus experience in Italy is, to me, one of the most interesting instruments that we have so far seen at European level from a financing perspective. From a financing perspective, that is wonderful, powerful instrument, because it doesn't consolidate with the public debt. It attracts private financing. It provides the credit enhancement and the de-risking, and it provides financing available to every single citizen, because now they can hand over their tax credit to third-party financing, and therefore even people and the vulnerable collectives can get access to financing.
Okay, Davide, thank you very much for that very complete answer. But there are some other themes that I also wanted to explore from the presentations. And the theme I'd like to explore next is the theme of trust. And Josera, in your presentation, you talked about trust for renovation or building trust. And you also talked about the difficulties of owners to take decisions collectively. So I wonder, what mechanisms have you used in the Basque region to square that circle, to build trust and allow easy decision-making processes? And just a word to the panelists, to make this more interactive, if you have a comment on another panelist's intervention, please put your hand up like this, and then I'll let you in to comment on your colleague's intervention. But Josera, could you talk to that trust question?
Okay, these questions might have two aspects. One linked to the implementation of the solution itself, and another one linked to the financing. In some cases, one barrier could be not understanding well the interventions and the renovation projects. Maybe right now in the Basque Country, we don't have specialized agents that can explain the benefits of having such interventions in buildings. We believe that with this service, these questions will be solved because we expect that there will be a bilateral relation between the offices and the building and the homeowners. That and this trust, and we hope that there is a not only trust, but the offices will show knowledge, will show commitment, and this can be solved this way. On the other way, there's when this kind of interventions are need to be financed, and in some cases. A minority of owners in the blocks of apartments might block the intervention because they don't have access to financing. And the rest of the people in the building well, they might feel that if the neighbors don't pay, they have to pay more. So it is very difficult to deal with this, especially if the financial instruments that are in the market right now are not specifically designed for home renovation. So in our project, we are also trying to design a financial instrument that is designed specifically for home renovation and might contribute to reduce this risk. We cannot eliminate the risk at all, but we might contribute. Actually, as Davide was mentioning before, we are working with them in Firostporo OPENGELA, and they are helping us to design this instrument.
Okay, Cesare, yes, that clarifies the situation. Sounds like it's very tricky for you in the Basque region. But turning back now to the on-bill financing, I had a question, a thought crossed my mind, Ivan, when you were presenting, and that is that you spoke about the fact that there are regulatory barriers to on-bill financing, and I guess those vary depending on which European country you're talking to, because you're getting the utility somehow to be the go-between between the renovation work and the owner. But could you say what's the most difficult barrier to on-bill financing that you've identified, and what mechanisms are being explored to overcome them?
Well, I would say that one of the most difficult barriers is legislation, and I would like to say a bit more about this because I think it's very important. First of all, including energy utility in a financing scheme means that energy utility should take at least partially a role of a financier, and then we have to, as it was mentioned and discussed already even before this morning, we have to think about what is the legislation that will apply to utility companies, if any, but probably there will be something that will have to be applied to utilities. And the second thing is how to understand if utilities will meet these requirements. There's also another barrier that is something, let's say, opportunity not used at this moment, related to financiers. And that is the fact that usually financing legislation in each country that regulates the financial market still is not well equipped to recognize decreased risk from different financing mechanisms, such as on-bill financing. In practice, this means that there is a possibility, and at the moment it would be one of the barriers. There is a possibility to allow financiers, for example, local banks, to have lower capital requirements based on investing in projects with a lower risk, which is here ensured by involving utilities in the structure. How we can resolve this legislative problem, maybe with the example of financing institutions and legislations, the solution would be to understand and to develop mechanisms to very well measure risks and their reduction, and then to be simply persistent and to try to explain to local banks, but also to local regulators, that this is something that is tangible, something that local banks can definitely apply, and then simply fighting for local regulators, simply saying make life of local banks a bit easier because they will invest in lower risk projects. So I would say that in this case, overcoming barrier would heavily depend on capacity building and explaining all the small details of the projects, because still, as they say, devil is in the details.
You make me think of the fact that indeed certain information is not gathered by banks on the loans that they send out. So the knowledge about the lower risk is not very widespread. And,
Definitely.
yeah, and I think that can be a difficulty. So we have some high hopes for the tagging work that's being done after the taxonomy work at European level, and that we will gather more reliable data very, very quickly. But I want to bring in...
Just to...
Please, yeah.
I wanted just to add that, as I mentioned before, utilities can help there as well, because they collect and they hold the large databases of different data that can be used to explain lower risk, such as previous energy consumption, and then understanding how it will be improved. This would already help. So data is there and can be provided by utilities.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Very good. So I wanted to turn to Cecilia. We've heard Davide referring to the Italian case in his reply on bill financing. But it struck me, you mentioned that studies have taken place that show that there's a good balance between expenditure and benefits, which I took to mean that the Italian government will have a net income from this scheme. Can you just say a few words about how that's possible if they're actually paying 110% of the costs?
Well, first, the data we have is not about 100%, 110%, because this is not on the market yet. So we have data from 50, 65%, 70%, and the whole of all this tax credit. And until I think the most recent report is from 2017, is quite detailed, and it considers income coming from the market that is created around these renovation activities that are really pushed by this tax credit scheme. So we have to see what happens in these 2 years. We have also seen that deep renovation, even if it really it has a high level of financing already, we are not at 110%, but we have already in the market, we are doing renovation projects with 75, 80% used to pay the contractor. This means that the flat owner will pay maybe 2,000 euro that can be financed by a bank easily in 5-7 years to have a complete renovation of this building. And when I talk about complete renovation, of course, we're talking of energy efficiency, but we're also talking about more comfort, about for example, asbestos removal, which in Italy is still something that exists, seismic renovation, more security, accessibility, because deep renovation, it's a complete renovation, of course. So I think that there is still a strong barrier that I used to call it cultural barrier. And as Renovate Italy, we're always calling to our government to set up schemes from one-stop shop for one-stop shops, because consumers, while taxpayers, people living in flats and houses, need some help to understand all that. Because I tried to explain the scheme in a very easy way, but it's not so easy. For example, what happens if the tax credit is not recognized by the Italian tax agency? The responsibility is of the first taxpayer, of the householder. So of course, the householder has to be sure that the project reach the energy targets that are required, and that the contractor is controlled, of course, by the architect or the engineer to be sure that they are really putting in place the energy measures that were described in the project. So, of course, householders need some support, and they don't have now this support. And this is the main barrier, because from an economical and financial point of view, the scheme is really perfect. It should work much more than it does today. What will happen with 110% is the big question, because of course, the law is now in the parliament, and there are like 8,000 amendments, proposal of amendments to this article, which is one article in the post-COVID recovery. The idea was very good. It was saying, let's bring a short period of time, 1.5 years, where everyone can renovate his house completely without paying any money. And this would be a shock measure also for the building sector. So the idea, it could work. But of course, from another point of view, the parliament is studying measure to make it a bit more difficult to have this 110%, just to reduce the number of projects that could be financed. And we have to see this balance, how it comes out, because there is, I think, a big risk that really this fantastic incentive is not used at all, because we are missing all this support to householders that are not technicians, are not experts in financing, and really need help in the renovation journey.
So from what you've said, Cecilia, it sounds to me like a plea for more one-stop shops, which is
Yes.
The basis of what I was going to ask Françoise, because Françoise, you've had great experience of one-stop shops. You've done a great deal of thinking around what services they should supply and how they can be financed. But we have an entrepreneur in the panel, Cecilia. I wondered, to what extent do you agree that one-stop shops should hold lists of certified or somehow qualified contractors? I mean, how do you know that the people you help are going to have the right contractors come to their homes and do the work?
Yeah, well, I agree with this proposal. It's actually the main question, which is brought by the people to be helped in order to find the right people to proceed with their project. That's key. But doing this, I mean, one-stop shop, you have to be well, especially if you are a public authority setting up your one-stop shop. If you do that, you have to be clear about your status, being above the market, and giving advice on level based, and not being involved afterwards with the results of the refurbishment is one thing, which is of course less supporting to the people than when the one-stop shop is itself in the market and trying to organize a full set of service. This is the key difficulty we see actually for the setting up of these full service one-stop shops, and this is why I would advocate that in each countries, and the European Commission should help to have this. There is some clarity about the fact that this full service one-stop shop be indeed considered as a service of economic general interest, which then helps to go through all the process of being consistent with the state aid regulations, and basically to set up concession model, for instance, where you have the private party taking risks, but also providing social services which are recognized per se, and then can be financed through a subsidy part within the contract. So basically, answering this question, you see that from one single point, you have to layer up and ask yourself the question about what is the status of this one-stop shop service.
Okay, very interesting. And I'm now looking at the questions coming in from the audience. And I have to say we have a very broad number of questions. I don't know if it's a good idea to put the questions on the screen. I have them here on my phone. But there's one that draws my attention. It says, who are the actual owners and managers of physical one-stop shop offices in the long term? And I know that's something Françoise you'll have spoken about, but I'd also like afterwards to bring Josera in on that question. Françoise, who are the physical owners?
Well, what I see is that physical owners of the one-stop shop can be a variety of people. As I mentioned it, most of them right now you see on the ground are actually associations or non-for-profit bodies which are financed by the public sector. But you also have entrepreneurs who try and set up this and for instance, in the Innovate program I mentioned, we had such examples in the UK and in the Netherlands. But what we saw also is that stepping in this market, while all the regulations and standard positioning of the one-stop shop are not settled, is risky. And for instance, relying on subsidies makes you be put in difficult situation when the subsidy ends. And actually, it's what really is happening on the ground. So really, I think that right now the one-stop shop story is really difficult, while we don't have this long-term view about the public support way of the one-stop shops. And what I would just like to insist, but it should not be considered as a pure public sector business, but it's more a matter of enabling public-private partnerships and concession models step in a sustainable way.
Josera, I'd like you to react, and I see Davide would also like to come in, so briefly react.
Very quickly, in our project we have two partners, Viviendas Municipales de Bilbao and de Begesa, that are public local companies dealing with retrofitting and housing sector. One important key player in our project are the municipalities and the local administrations. The local administration, as the closest administration to the citizen, knows, has more knowledge about the needs and requirements of the districts and the areas in the city and the necessities they have, the needs they have. So for this phase, for this pilot phase, those offices are owned by the local administration. We plan that in the next phases of our project, we will repeat this scheme. But so I mentioned in my presentation, we are learning by doing, and maybe this is the scheme that works right now, but maybe in a few years we have to change the scheme. At this moment, the offices will be owned by the local administrations.
Okay, great. Davide, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, very quickly about building up on what Françoise and Josera mentioned. We at Genie Finance, we are strong believers about the importance of joining forces between the public and the private sectors. So in that regard, I really believe that public and private partnerships are keys in order to enable these transformations, because we need to overcome the limitations of both sides. I mean, it is absolutely clear from decades of home renovation programs that the public sector cannot do that just by themselves. They don't have enough means, they don't have enough knowledge of what's going on in the market. And there's these problems related to subsidies and grants that once they are over, then you need to look for more grants. And so that's why sometimes programs get disconnected for up to 7 years. And if we look at other experience, for example, the PACE financing in the US, which finance over $7 billion of home renovation, there are some PACE PACE providers that are public, and they've done very well, but they are like no more than 5% of the total market. the remaining 95% is from private providers, because they are the ones that are able to attract private capital, institutional investors to scale up, to really go and cover on a large ground. On the other side, private providers have their own vested interests, so which we believe that the surveillance and guidance and coordination with policymakers and with city managers is fundamental to be sure that these programs are on track and they deliver on their promise. And that's why closing private-public partnerships, we believe that it's a challenging format, but is what is providing the right balance and scalability.
Okay, so in the Slido feed, there's a question that's got 13 votes. So I think our audience are very interested to have an answer to this one. It reads, how will energy poor households not eligible for loans or tax schemes or living in rural areas, not in city districts, access renovation schemes? Would someone like to take that one on? Françoise.
Yes, okay. Yes, this is really a key concern, because actually what we see is that the mixture between the public subsidies and access to financing is really something very, very important to consider, that this renovation wave could be sustainable and equitable. So I think that in the case of the rural areas where people are already poor and so on, we add up issues, because basically the market for housing is very low, and the idea that if you refurbish your home, you will be better from a financing perspective is difficult, because there is no prospect of the so-called green value. So basically, I think that given, for instance, the consideration you gave, Adrian, on the overall benefit of having people in better homes from the collective perspective, I really think that in these cases, the renovation, it should be considered to be financed through subsidies to a very, very large extent. On the other hand, you have cases which are not these one, because usually the people we are talking about, they are already restricting their energy bills because they cannot afford to pay for it. But you have a number of people where this capacity to transform the energy bill into the repayment of a loan is really able to cover, let's say, up to 80, sometimes 90% of the building renovations. It's very difficult to, because you have really a very wide differences in this ratio. But in these cases, it's clear that the option you propose to the people is to transform an exposure to the raise of their energy bills, whereas that could be covered with doing the refurbishment, and then it means that they have more fixed charges in their budget. So this is a consideration which is not so obvious to do for anyone. And what I would like to emphasize is that from a social standpoint, it's also very important that the one-stop shop is not just considered to be, providing financing, but also to make sure that the sustainability of the loan is really taken into consideration. So, for instance, if you structure collaterals in order to secure the investors, that's very good and very important to do. But in my view, it's really in a second order consideration compared with the idea that you should really be sure that providing financing is sustainable, whether it's on bill or normal plain financing. And this is really a public order consideration.
Thank you, Françoise. Cecilia, did you want to comment on this? I think I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. So, well, first I wanted to underline that the Italian tax credit scheme works very well also for, well, of course, in rural areas, because it's not limited to city districts, but also for low-income families, because if you are very low income, maybe you can't use tax credit because you're not a taxpayer, but if you apply to the handover of tax credit, you can use it if you use this option. So even if you are not a taxpayer, but your renovation would give you this incentive, well, you can use it to pay your contractor. So I think this is a very strong point for the scheme. I think that another thing I wanted to underline is that, as I said before, when we talk about deep renovation, people normally is not sensible just to energy issues, but to general renovation and global renovation to increase their comfort. In my company, we developed this co-design strategy to build the energy project with the flat owner. I think that up to now we worked almost with 15,000 families, and what we find more in low-income families, I have to say, is a big attention to the general quality of their building. So energy saving is a part of the process. And I think that this is a very important point, and we have always to consider this, because talking to people just about energy, well, it's more difficult to bring them to achieve a complete renovation. Well, and then I wanted to say something to Ivan about working with utilities in energy efficiency renovation. This is what is happening here in Italy with the scheme that I proposed before. I think the biggest issue is that first they have a concept of timing of a renovation process completely different than the construction part. We are used to very long-term projects, 2 years, 3 years, but utilities are used to very quick activities. They are used to have very higher benefits from every project, from a revenue point of view. Okay, in construction sector, we are used on 5-6% of benefit from every project. They are moving from 20-25%. And so when the construction works get in a utility-driven process, well, it's very difficult, at least in my experience, to have a good, balance between cost and benefits.
That's a very interesting point, Cecilia, but I have to flag that we're coming very close to the end. So Ivan, if you'd like to make a very quick reaction, that would be great. But I had also hoped you might address the question we can see on screen about could home renovation instruments be linked to health outcomes? But I don't know, Ivan, if you have time. We have about 2 minutes left before I have to draw a 1-minute summary.
I would just emphasize the fact that on-bill financing and bringing utilities in brings for utilities not only maybe increase in profit margins, but it also counts on expanding their database of customers and number of potential customers. So it is not only a profit margin, but also volume of their investments. And that is what we count on can be good incentive for them to join. That would be really short reaction.
Okay, as I see on my clock, I've only 1 minute left to go, so I'm going to stop the discussion here. I'm going to thank the 5 speakers, and I'm going to try and draw some conclusions. I have to say that the audience has been highly participative. There have been, as you see, 25 questions asked, and we might ask the organizers to see if we can have a printout of those, so we might be able to go back to some of them later, or they might indeed inform our work. But just to close, I see that today we've heard, as I said earlier, looked at 2 key strands. One, the one-stop shop model, what it can do, what the services it can provide, and what are the difficulties that need to be overcome to make it much more widespread. And on the other hand, an extremely promising financing model that's available to everybody, and we've heard that very clearly from Francois's reaction to the audience question. So a financing model that's literally around the corner for everybody, but yet hasn't scaled up in Europe. So the practical experiences that are being developed that we've learned about through the projects in the Basque region, in the other regions of Spain, are very encouraging. And it seems to me that this is an area that needs further development as we move forward. But what I like about these models that we've discussed in this session is that there's a real understanding that to upscale, we need to build trust in the community. And in order to build trust, we need to have reliable, qualified individuals giving reliable, independent advice and technical assistance. So doing a lot of hand-holding and bringing the owners and the occupiers along this road. And maybe that's one area we didn't touch on enough, but the one-stop shop shouldn't, in my view, be seen as only an upfront service, but it has to be an accompanying service through the process of the construction works and afterwards in managing the new building and in assessing whether or not the performance promises are being delivered for the benefit of the citizens. So I think maybe our conversation today focused maybe too much on that more early and construction stage of the process, but there is this maintenance and management stage too that I think is really an interesting and important area. So I'm going to stop there and once again thank the panelists for their very stimulating presentations and the audience for their great questions. And the EUSEF team asked me as moderator to urge all participants, and that will include the panelists, to fill out the satisfaction survey that will appear on your screen right after the end of the event. And in fact, that will stay live for about 20 minutes, so you don't have to rush to do it. You can do it in 5 minutes' time. So once again, thank you. I hope you found it stimulating. I certainly did. And we will meet again, either virtually or in person. Keep well, everybody. Bye.